Hey out there, rock and rollers. Welcome to the 138th episode of the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Brought to you by me, your host, Mac B. the Wolf, and I will be joined, as always, by my partner in crime from the East Coast of the United States of America, Gary Action Jackson. And we appreciate everybody who tuned in last week to our talk on AC/DC at 50. With the author of that amazing book, Martin Popoff, our fellow Pantheon Podcast brother, who has written, 120 books, something crazy like that. But this one's great, beautiful coffee table book, 50 stories of the band over their time, amazing pictures, and he's just a fun guy to talk to, fountain of knowledge, good guy, Martin Popoff. You should definitely check out his History in 5 Songs podcast. And this week, we keep the train rolling with the hard rock and heavy metal. As an amazing anniversary is upon us, folks. It's the 40th anniversary of Metallica's Kill 'Em All, their debut album on Megaforce Records that came out July 25th, 1983. And without a lot of fanfare, right? That wasn't on MTV. They famously didn't do videos back then, Metallica. And it's not like MTV probably would have put it up next to Duran Duran or Men at Work or Lionel Richie or Michael Jackson or whatever we were so into in 1983. Being a kid from the suburbs, I had no idea about Metallica. None. It wasn't until they did the one video, I was still watching MTV quite a bit, and I was like, oh, look at these guys. They're really, really heavy. I got to learn a little bit more about them. Not too long after that, of course, the Black Album came out, and they became the biggest band in the world and haven't really relinquished that much, I would say, over the last 30 or so years. But because we didn't know much about it back then, we didn't grow up on Metallica the way some people did, we needed to enlist some help to go over this classic record, and we got somebody awesome for you today. It's Jay Scott from The Hook Rocks, a great podcast, another great Pantheon Podcast brother of ours, and he's been doing this for a long time. He's been doing it for over 4 years, hundreds of episodes. He has great guests, great artists on there, great conversations about rock music in general. And he's been nice enough to have me on his show a couple times. So we thought we'd enlist Jay to come on and talk to us about Metallica because he had older brothers and friends in his neighborhood who got him into Metallica in the early days, in the Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning days. And so he's going to tell us some about his experience growing up with Metallica. And of course, we're going to go track by track and talk about the sonic quality and importance of this album in the Metallica catalog. But first, hey, you know me, we've got a little bit of business to cover here. As always, we mentioned we are proud members of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Network of about 100 shows, all music related, not all hard rock or rock and roll, so there's something out there for everybody. And you can check out more at pantheonpodcast.com or follow them at Pantheon Pods. And of course, we got to mention our incredible sponsor, rarevinyl.com. Based in the UK, guys, Rare Vinyl's been in business 40 years. They have over 250,000 items in stock, and they ship everywhere around the world. With 5 stars from Trustpilot, you can know that if you're getting something from them, it's quality. So go to the website, rarevinyl.com. Use the code UGLY, UGLY, and you can save 10% off your orders. So whether it's some kind of sweet Metallica item that you can only find in Europe and you want it shipped here to the United States, or maybe you just want to get the latest album on LP, go to rarevinyl.com. There's something there you're going to love. Whether it's new or it's classic, it's in mint condition, it's a first edition, it's a poster, it's a point-of-sale item from a record store you remember as a kid. Go to rarevinyl.com. Use code UGLY. It'll save you 10%, and that benefits our show. We appreciate you doing that. Now back to Metallica. Yeah, I've seen Metallica, 5 or 6 times now over the last 30 years. They always deliver live. And you got to look at Kill 'Em All as this is really, truly the beginning. Still a lot of influence from Dave Mustaine, even though he may not have recorded the stuff on the album. He'd written a lot of those songs. He played a lot of them live. And so we have to talk about Dave and his role in Metallica's rise and rise and rise. Well, this is a long one. Look, once we get Jay on, once there's 3 of us talking, there's a lot less lull in the conversation, right? Everybody's got something to say. We went so long, Jackson had to check out just a little bit early. That's okay. We're going to have a lot of fun here. This is me and Jackson with Jay from The Hook Rocks talking about Metallica's first album, Kill 'Em All, as it turns 40, right here on The Wolf. Jay Scott, the legendary Jay Scott from The Hook Rocks.
What's up, buddy?
How are you?
I'm good. I'm eating my sausage McMuffin right now. It's only noon here in Chicago. I'm eating breakfast.
Yeah, that's all good. I got to introduce you to Action Jackson there in South Georgia.
Carl
Nice to
Weathers,
meet you.
what's going on, man?
Not too much. Thank you so much for being with us.
What's happening? Here we are, right?
Here we are, here to celebrate Kill 'Em All as it turns 40, which is hard to believe. But then I feel like I say that every week. We're always doing something that's turning 40 or 50 or something. It's like, can you believe Journey's Frontiers is 40? Like, yeah, well, I guess it is, you know.
Remember that cheesy video with Separate Ways?
Yeah, it was fantastic. It's gold.
Nothing better than Air Keyboard.
Yeah, man.
Air Keyboard and like the sleeveless muscle shirt. Or,
The Ocean Pacific muscle shirt. Yeah.
yeah. That was classic. How about them? Like right now, present day, is there a more dysfunctional band?
I know.
In music right now?
They make the Eagles look like best friends.
Jesus.
And that went down the toilet quick, too. That was like one day of, you know what, now he's out of the band.
I know.
Well, far be it from me to comment on something I know nothing about, but when you look at the wife of Jonathan Cain, and you look at the wife of Neil Sean, maybe that has something to do with it.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I know I was thinking about this yesterday. She's hot and everything, but she's nuts, man. I mean, come on, dude. She crashed the White House. She's a national security risk, man.
I mean, I was watching a video clip of her. She's one of those evangelists that tells you to send you her your paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
She's one of those. And yeah. I mean, and Neil Sean's wife is not all there either.
No, like I said, she's beautiful and all, but she's she's insane and she crashed the White House.
Paula White was Trump's advisor. So there's some craziness, and I think when you look at there's probably already friction already, but when you look at those two being in now the realm of Journey.
Right.
I think that has a lot to do with why Journey is complete drama right now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah. But you talk about Journey, though, because we're going to talk about Kill 'Em All coming out in 1983. And I want to get how you came to Kill 'Em All. And I don't know if you knew about it in 83 or not. I mean, I think they said by 1984 it had sold 60,000 copies. Jackson and I are just a little bit younger than you. We were 10 in 1983. So our little brains weren't ready for Metallica at this point, and we got our music basically from MTV. And who was all over MTV in 1983? It was Men at Work, Duran Duran, Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie. I mean, these are the big selling albums of 1983. And then you look at the rock side. Yeah, Journey hit it big with Frontiers. And on the hard rock side, eventually in 1983, an album that we did, Metal Health by Quiet Riot, would become the first heavy metal record to hit #1. But like Peace of Mind by Iron Maiden, although it hit big with the metal crowd, it didn't have widespread appeal. It wasn't all over MTV or anything like that. Dio's first album, Holy Diver, it kind of, again, good with the metal crowd, good with the hard rock crowd, got maybe a little bit of MTV time, but not a ton. So, that's where hard rock was kind of going. Def Leppard's obviously huge with Pyromania. The Scorpions are doing well. But because Metallica famously did not do videos, and MTV probably wouldn't have put them on anyway, except for maybe 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And these aren't suburban friendly tunes that they're cranking out here. I mean, eventually the world came to them, but in 1983, world wasn't ready for it, man.
That is such an interesting topic when it comes to Metallica, how they rose from where they came from. And you're absolutely right, Mac. 1983, I had no clue about Metallica.
None.
I had no idea who Metallica was. And I think for the most part, the majority of teens and kids did not know either who they were. And I think, and I'm going to circle back with this, the decline of 80s rock as we knew it and the pushback in the early 90s started in 1983 with Metallica, although we didn't know it.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is we all knew what happened with 80s rock, right? Pretty much the big moment that came was the US Festival that we just celebrated the 40th anniversary. That was really what put that music on the map with teenagers across the country. Because when we looked and watched that video or that performance that day, we saw seas of people and we saw a sea of young people. And we heard them on rock radio, and if you were lucky enough to have a radio station that played that stuff in the market you lived in, you were well aware of who the bands were. And of course, when you went to the grocery store or wherever, and you read Hit Parader and Circus Magazine, you saw pictures of these bands, but you never saw them perform.
Right.
Until that moment. And that's when, like, myself with my brother that day and teens across the country who weren't there were locked in on that. And it was a very different time in rock music, right? The glam had not hit yet.
Right.
If you look at the bands that were coming up prior to that, obviously Van Halen was the big band. You know, they were the at the top of the mountain at that time. But they weren't essentially glam. They kind of had this party, feel good atmosphere, and their look really matched what their music was.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned like Maiden, who was popular with the metal crowd. I still remember sitting in my neighbor's house, and his older brother had like this one of those neon Number of the Beast signs that when you turned off the light, it would glow. You know, nice. It was pretty intense. But again, that was like music for the burnouts, which was Mason and Priest and Ozzy. You know, that was the bad kids on the block that listened to that. You know,
right. Which kids would get bad grades.
Right. Which amazes me why or how Maiden is more popular now than they have ever been. Okay. And Ozzy Osbourne became this pop culture icon when I had to covert ops smuggle those records into my house growing up in a Catholic household, going to Catholic school. So there was a danger to hard rock and what was considered heavy metal at the time. I mean, Journey was considered heavy metal at the time. You know, how funny that is. But you had these men, you had Scorpions, you know, with the Zoo and Blackout and all that kind of stuff. And it was very like mysterious. And it was really kind of like, what is all this stuff about? And Metallica started in 1983. No one heard of Metallica in 1983. No one. It wasn't on anyone's radar unless you were local or unless somehow, some way you got like this underground record. So how I point to that moment being the eventual decline, as after the US Festival, we saw Motley Crue, we saw Rat, Quiet Riot, Def Leppard, Van Halen continued to have all these success. All those bands on that bill of the US Festival had huge albums that came out after that performance.
Right.
Probably their biggest album. 84 was the biggest album for Van Halen. Love It for Sting was the biggest album for Scorpions, and so on. Triumph, Ozzy. Well, Ozzy, you know,
Out of the Cellar, yeah, all those.
Yeah, and and then of course, you know, Motley Crue would Shout the Devil. But that really took off with MTV. MTV married that genre of music, and then it started to just break open. And now you saw the glam, you saw the makeup, especially with Theater of Pain with Motley Crue. When you look at that back album cover, and Vince Neil's got that garter belt on, and it's all glammed up. And then they had the power ballad, Home Sweet Home, and everyone started to have the power ballad because the MTV Request Hour, that was #1 for months, if you remember.
Oh, yeah.
And the glam is with them, Poison, and all these other bands.
Bon Jovi, he's a pretty boy.
Bon Jovi,
you know? Yeah.
Right. So then Metallica is starting to rise through all this, becoming more popular by the day, slowly, right? What's the term? What rises fast falls fast, so build it slow and steady, which is what Metallica really did. It was slow and steady, capturing one fan at a time. And Kill 'Em All really didn't connect with people until Whiplash started to get played on rock radio in like the midnight hours, right? That was when it was played. And then Ride the Lightning came out. And then, of course, before that, you had like Am I Evil, which piqued a lot of curiosity. Like, what is this? This is so different than what I'm used to hearing. Our minds and brains were not trained to hear this music yet because it was completely different than anything. So then Ride the Lightning came out, and that had like For Whom the Bell Tolls and all this stuff. And then the big one was Master of Puppets. But there was still this mystery because they didn't make any videos in the age of video. So they were like this band that was like, for the fans, they're for us, man. They're not selling out. They're doing all the stuff. And then one came out with And Justice for All in 1988 or 89. They were on the Monsters of Rock tour with Van Halen, Scorpions, Dokken, and they were the second band on the bill after Kingdom Come.
Right.
But everybody likes to fault Nirvana as killing that glam era of rock, and it wasn't. It was Metallica, and it started in 1983 because if you look at the incline of their popularity, with one, and then it hit with the Black Album. It was the anti-glam rock. It was what people were familiar with. Nirvana people weren't familiar with. Metallica was, because you saw the burnouts, quote unquote, wearing the Metallica metal up your ass shirts and the lightning shirts. And then when it hit MTV, it became acceptable for everyone that was into the Poisons and all that stuff to start to go towards Metallica. And then, of course, with the Black Album, it blew up, and that was the death knell of glam rock.
Well, that's a lot to take in there, Jay. What do you think about all that, Jackson?
I mean, I think it's right on. You know, you were talking about the Black Album. It was funny when those videos came out, they were kind of stylized. Like they were all in all black. You know, they kind of had their look they were going for. If you go back and look at the early promo pictures from the band, they're just straight up just dirtbag looking guys. Like they're just wearing old t-shirts and jeans and
they were burnout
sneakers. Yeah. So I think that was it. They look like a band that you could be in. They didn't have expensive clothes. They weren't really super good looking guys. They played fast and they played loud. And yeah, you're right. They were the anti glam metal. They were a real deal. And yeah, something like since you couldn't hear it on the radio, if you could get your hands on it, you were automatically that much cooler.
Right. And there was a sense of mystery too, or a mysterious element with them, because they were so like evil sounding.
Yeah.
I mean, especially with the early stuff. When you listen to Creeping Death and you listen, and we're talking about Kill 'Em All, you listen to Motor Breath, Phantom Lord, you know.
How fast is Metal Militia? I'm like, Jesus, can they play that without cocaine? That's unbelievable.
Yeah, Hit the Lights, you know. I mean, opening up a record with Hit the Lights. And, you know, it wasn't until really Ride the Lightning that you went back to Kill 'Em All.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like Shout the Devil. You went back and listened to Too Fast for Love. It was kind of, and that was kind of a thing back then with a lot of bands who had their debut album that didn't really connect or resonate with the crowd yet. And then they released another album. But Ride the Lightning really was what launched Master of Puppets. And then when you heard Master of Puppets, you were like, holy cow, this is incredible. But when you're hearing Master of Puppets or Battery on the radio at that time versus, you know, Nothing But a Good Time or, you know, Girls, it was
Living
so
on a
different.
prayer. Yeah.
That a lot of people were like still trying to train their brain as to what this was. And then one came out with this dark, mysterious video. And then it all came together with the Black Album. But again, the death of glam rock in the 80s started in 1983 because in my opinion, it wasn't Nirvana, it wasn't grunge, it was Metallica that did it.
And I'm with you there, you know. But then to me, because you're right, everybody points to Nirvana. Oh, once Nirvana hit, it was over. I'm like, well, that's when it was really over. That's when the record companies kind of called and said, oh, all the disaffected kids want this instead. But to me, because you said it was the 1983, but 1983 was when it was really starting to take off for glam rock, you know. And then by 87, 88, when Hysteria comes out and it's the biggest thing in the whole world, and you know, Motley Crue is everywhere and all that. When Metallica comes out with One, and they're all dressed in black, and you have this scary video about a guy who, you know, lost everything in war and just wants the doctors to kill him, like that, you don't put that on next to Living on a Prayer, you know, something like that. It scared people, but it makes you realize you're right. So the foundation of it started in 83, but that's just like when the cracks started to come in the basement. Nobody saw it. Nobody knew it was down there because we're up on the third floor partying. We don't know what's going on in the basement down there. So you're right. But it took until 88 for us to find, because honestly, that's the first time I'd ever heard of Metallica. When I was like, oh, we're going to play this new video by One, their first video ever. It's like, oh, okay, well, I like metal acts. You know, yeah, I like Def Leppard. I like this, right? I'm like, what is that? Oh my God. They're fast as hell. They're heavy as hell. They're kind of scary. They're sneering at you. They're not like smiling like, hey, girls, come on backstage. They're like, we're going to murder everybody. You know, like, whoa, but I feel like their songs, people can relate to a lot of the stuff better. It's easy to relate to a party when you're in a good mood, but the rest of your life, when you're slogging through life and it's hard and you have bad things happen to you, I feel like it's easier to relate to some of these, maybe not all the stuff about war, but I feel like they're a lot more relatable than maybe they would come off as in 1983 if this is the first time you ever heard them.
Yeah, exactly. I think it may not have produced the immediate change, but what it did was it whetted the appetite of the young kids listening, that when grunge came out, there was already the prep work had already been done.
Yeah.
Right. And you think about how things changed in terms of people accepting music. One of the bands that benefited from that one video in 1988 was Queensryche. Queensryche couldn't get a sniff before that, before Operation Mindcrime. I mean, everybody knew how great Queensryche was, but they were an 1,800, 2,000 seater band, that wouldn't be playing arenas or anything like that. But without And Justice for All, Operation Mindcrime doesn't have its popularity. Because again, it was more mysterious. It was different, And then you started to see bands like Anthrax. You started to see bands like Megadeth, who we're going to talk about, Dave Mustaine and his impact to Kill 'Em All. Obviously. But that really, it made all that kind of stuff acceptable because the minds of the youth at that time were starting to train themselves to listen, because it's all about your ear and how about you absorb it. When you're hearing power ballads and party good time songs and, like you said, watching the videos of chicks, scantily clad women, and backstage and all that, it's like you come to expect that. The problem is that those rock bands didn't adapt when they saw Metallica and Queensryche and all these bands. They doubled down on it. And then I talk about that Circus magazine, that Hit Parader magazine that we used to read when we would go to the grocery stores. Their moms were shopping. It used to be you'd hear the band on the radio and then you'd see them in the magazine. And I've mentioned this before on my podcast. You started to see pictures of bands that you had no idea who they were. You never heard them, but because they looked pretty and they looked good, they were getting signed to deals. But the music sucks. I mean, we're talking bands like Hurricane Alice and Kitten Claws or whatever.
Bang Tango.
Yeah, like these bands that were just forgettable. And one of the most important quotes of someone who was at the tail end of that era is by Butch Walker, one of my favorites. Great producer in Nashville. He's produced everyone from Keith Urban to Pink, but he's also got his solo stuff. And he's been able to reinvent himself. And the reason why he says is because all the crap, I'm paraphrasing here, but all the crap that came out at the end of that era, he was part of, and he was forgettable. And because he was forgettable, he was able to go and reinvent himself. But if you were in a Great White, if you were in some of these other bands, you couldn't. You were locked in because you doubled down on the glam when you should have been finding a way to adapt to what was rising after you. Then they tried to adapt after, everyone started to release their grunge type album, like Motley Crue's self-titled album in 94. Right. Great album, but it was too late.
Yeah, too late. Yeah.
They were typecast, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Kill 'Em All is really, when you look at it, and I love the album, I love that we're talking about it today, is the core of that change, is where it began, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then later in the 80s, once you saw that Metallica is starting to rise up from And Justice for All, then you got to see Alice Cooper and Ozzy starting to come back like, oh, you like black macabre kind of stuff? Well, that's kind of what we do. Let's jump on and we can show you that we can still do that too. And, Priest did it just, right? Because you look at Turbo, some of that stuff on Turbo, no one calls that their favorite Priest. Although Priest Live came out after that, and I do like that. That was actually, it was released, I think, today's June 21st. I think it was 37 years ago today that it was released. But anyway, I like that. But, and the videos, the clothes they were wearing, it kind of had that ZZ Top chug on it. It wasn't that great. But then it comes to Ram It Down, and certainly Painkiller. Painkiller is them going in the right direction. Like, okay, we get it. We're going to evolve. But you're right. A lot of the other bands are like, no, we're going to keep playing our arenas. We got nothing to worry about. 1993 is not going to see all of us, on the state fair circuit or anything like that.
If that.
Well, those paid well. They wouldn't even make it there, right?
They're at the Rib Fest circus, more like it,
Hi, this is Mick Wall, and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London.
Yeah. Well, now, Jackson, you introduced me more to their back catalog when we were in college. You introduced me to Ride the Lightning, and we saw them, Jay, on the Black Album tour together when we lived together in college in 1993. So that was the first time that we saw them. And obviously the Black Album blew up those 2 years, 3 years, whatever it was going. But Jackson, how did you find the back catalog? I mean, did you get to one and then you're like, oh, I got to see what else they got?
Correct. Yeah, because I had seen, once I heard Injustice, I had seen people's like tapes of Master of Puppets and Ride the Lightning, and a friend of mine, he's like, if you like that, here, I'm going to give you a bootleg of, not a bootleg, but a copy of Ride the Lightning. And I listened to that back to front. I can still listen to that the entire way through. And it's interesting when you listen to that record and then this one, Kill 'Em All, the leaps and bounds that they went through, not only with songwriting, but also with production too.
Well, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that because I know they didn't have any kind of budget at all. What was like $15,000 or something like that to make it. James' vocals are, they could sound better. And he wasn't as good a singer then. I just have to say, now his power and his voice is pure metal majesty, man. He knows what to do with his voice. He knows how to command the stage with it. A little bit of shrieking. It's a little tinny on some of these songs. I mean, would you guys agree with me there? It's not quite the James we've come to know and love.
Yeah, I think at the time he was he 21 yet?
He was around that, yeah. He wasn't real old.
So he probably didn't have any vocal training at that time. He probably was just a young kid singing and kind of, maybe had a lesson here and there, but it was more the growl at that time, and it was more about just the attitude. And you look at a lot of singers early on in their careers. You look at Paul Stanley, you look at some of these other singers that change the way they deliver a note and sing a note, how they use their diaphragm more, and a lot of them sing in the beginning from their neck up, right? It all comes from their neck, doesn't really come from anything else. And, I think that's kind of why you saw the difference in the evolution of his voice. But, with the budget, $15,000, and you look at when this finally hit the Billboard charts, wasn't until years later.
Right.
And that was because of
Master of Puppets.
Was Master of Puppets and all the popularity with that, because then people went back and started to rediscover. I was lucky enough to live in a neighborhood with kids my age who had older brothers who were burnouts.
Nice.
And I don't remember Kill 'Em All so much, but I remember Ride the Lightning. And I do remember the album cover of Kill 'Em All. I remember Creeping Death, and I remember Whiplash. And then I remember some stuff that they did that I don't believe was on an album, which was Blitzkrieg, which was a cover of the new wave of British heavy metal, which we got to get into because this album is a direct result of the influence of new wave of British heavy metal.
Oh yeah.
And Am I Evil, which is the old Diamond Head cover. So I remember hearing Whiplash, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, it's kind of different. But then I remember hearing Am I Evil, and of course, being in Catholic school at that age, I was like, ooh, this is scandalous. This is what is this? And then you started to see the burnouts, wearing the Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, or Metallica shirts. That was like on rotation. Once in a while, you'd see like a Exodus shirt or like an Anthrax or an Ozzy, but it was mostly Maiden, Priest, Metallica. And they always had black jeans on or regular jeans with white gym shoes and the jean jacket with the back patches and the buttons and the little patches on the side. And when I would go to my friend's house to listen, we, of course, sneak in the older brother's room when they were out and just listen to Metallica. And again, my mind still was kind of confused because I was used to hearing melody.
Right.
And there really wasn't a lot of melody in Kill 'Em All or, in this thrash metal. Really wasn't. I mean, there was melody, but it was kind of like you really had to listen for it. And it really wasn't until the Black Album that they really started to corral the melody of a song. But yeah, it was just, I remember the early days of Metallica, but again, it wasn't constant. It was whenever I could listen to it, we did, but it wasn't ever on radio. And then there was a radio station in Chicago called WVVX 103.1, which was on at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night. And during the day, it was a Spanish station. And then at night, it would turn over to a metal station. And this was like in 1986. So I was 11 in 1986. And I remember because they had a good relationship with the guys in Metallica. And they world premiered Master of Puppets one night during the week. And I remember literally sitting on my bed because I had a Sanyo dual cassette speaker with a turntable and speakers on the side. I'd saved up my paper route money and I wanted to so I got that. So I'm listening to WVVX RPM 103.1, the world premiering Master of Puppets. And I remember just just staring at the radio for over an hour, like not moving, just going, what is this? Like, what is going on with my brain, with how I'm absorbing this? And then I was kind of sold after that. So, but then you went back and you really started to listen to the older stuff, and then you really start to appreciate Kill 'Em All and how dangerous that album was. And I think the rawness, more so than any other album that they have, the rawness on Kill 'Em All is what makes that separate from the other albums, because these are kids, man. Kirk Hammett, I think, was 19. Lars Ulrich, I think, was not even 21 yet.
And James, I'm looking it up. James, you mentioned, was he even 20 years old? His birthday is August 3rd, 1963. So when they were recording this, he was a teenager.
Yeah.
So which is crazy.
Street. This was street. This was raw. This was a middle finger to everything that was going on. This was their space. And to think about the importance and the significant and just what was happening, they released an album like this that was so different than anything that was coming out. And they did it, and they didn't care. And that is the genesis of Metallica right there. That is, who gives a fuck?
That's who they are. Yeah, that's right.
And then you hear the backstory about, how they were on the West Coast. I think it was Lars he knew a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who said, "Hey, I'll get you one song on a compilation record." So they pack up.
Massacre.
Yeah, they pack up and they drive in a U-Haul from California to New York to record one song. This wasn't like a, American Idol thing. I mean, they had nothing. They were nothing. They had nothing, but they just made this giant trek to go out there to do something they loved. And you're right. This album sounds like they recorded it probably in an afternoon. And the fact that they didn't go back and remaster it, or not remaster it, but go like re-record it or anything like that, it's still preserved today in that state, is pretty awesome, because you can hear that. Like you were saying, they're teenagers just playing a music that nobody had ever heard before.
Yeah, and that was Hit the Lights that got on Metal Massacre, and it kind of spawned the rest of it. Now, I give the vocal quality, it needs some work, and they didn't know what they were doing, right? But the precision of the guitar work on here deserves, to be held pretty highly. I feel like, you can say, "Oh, well, let's just do it." I'm like, no, do you know how hard it is to do that precisely and not let it sound like a mess and, hear it, just smear all over your speakers and it would just sound like noise. To do that well, that's real talent. And nobody even knew people had talent like that, because music like this didn't exist. And one thing that I think you guys might find interesting, when I was doing research for this, I found out their second gig ever was at the Whiskey in 1983, opening for Saxon, a big new wave of British heavy metal star band, right, coming to LA to do their thing. Crew was supposed to open for them, but Crew was getting too big. They're too big to open for some British band that people didn't know that well. So they bumped out, and in slides Metallica. And so you're talking, Jay, about how this was the death knell for glam rock, even though glam rock was kind of just taking off at this point. No, this is what the next thing is, and people better pay attention.
And no one was. No one gave it a serious look because it was too fast and it was too hard. And I am reminded of the conversation that I had with Joe Satriani when he talked about the hardest Van Halen song for him to play, because we were talking about the rumors.
That was a great show, by the way, Jay. I was so jealous when you were talking to him.
Thank you. But he talks about I'm the One. And he talks, the reason why it's so hard is because of the right hand, because of the fast that Eddie was playing, and how fatigued your hand can get by doing that for 3 minutes, right? He's like, it's such a hard song, but everybody hears it. And I tell them why it's hard. And they're like, oh, that's probably the easy part. No, that's the hard part, to do that through a whole 3.5 minute song. And then you look at Metallica, like you said, the guitar work. Yeah, they got the cool, like Seek and Destroy, and the lead on that is awesome. But it's that rhythm, that thrashness, where the fatigue can settle in on your wrist and in your hand.
Yeah.
But they're doing not for 3.5 minutes, for 5 to 8 minutes, because their songs were longer. And that really is very underappreciated when you talk about the guitar players in Metallica. Everybody says, oh, Kirk's not that good of a bullshit. He's a great guitar player, Dave Mustaine, a great guitar player. Obviously, he wasn't on any of those songs, But even James Hetfield as a rhythm guitar player, I mean, that's hard to do. You do that with your wrist, playing that fast for 5 to 6 minutes, and see if you can keep up. Playing the same rhythm exactly from the first part of the song to the last, because they have that level on a studio and they could tell what's slagging, what's not. You got to keep that up the whole song, and you can't loop it like you can now. You have to play that, and very underappreciated when you think about the guitar work on any of the Metallica albums. One of the things that I was able to celebrate last year was the Megaforce anniversary show in Hollywood, Florida at the Hard Rock with 7,000 Metallica fans. Cool. And they talked about, they Raven opened up for them and at this show, and Raven was on the first tour that they did in the US. It was a co-headline tour.
Co-headline, yeah.
Yeah, but they had a little bit of a documentary at the beginning of the set about this album that they recorded. And then in the middle of the set, to give them a break, they had another bit too. But they talked about how it was a phone call to Metallica on the phone that convinced them to go from San Francisco to New York based on a phone call to go to Zazula's house. In the middle of the night, got there in the middle of the night, they drove there with barely any money, and they recorded this album. And I know there were some bands from England that wanted to, Megaforce had a lot of bands from England, but they didn't have an American band. They wanted to have an American band, and they felt Metallica would be the perfect band to do that. And it was a great little 10-minute, 15-minute documentary. But to hear all these songs played, they did nothing from Master of Puppets and on. They did everything from the first two albums, and they did Blitzkrieg and Am I Evil too. Wow. They ended with Blitzkrieg. No, they ended with Hit the Lights, but they also played Blitzkrieg. They played Metal Militia. They played, it was just fantastic. And to hear this music and this setting that I saw last year of these albums, I can't see Metallica again. I can't go through them again.
Ruined
because because all right, I've seen with a small 7,000 show playing the songs from the first two albums of their career. I can't go to a big stadium and look at screens now because I'm just gonna be like, I don't need to see them anymore. I've seen them several times throughout the years, but it was just a way to cap off my fandom with their music in that setting and to kind of revisit and take me back to when I was a young kid and just sneaking this music because of Sister Blanche or Sister Benedicta heard this in my Catholic school or saw these cassette tapes. I'd get a detention. I'd get in trouble. Confiscated. It was so. It just, man. That's why I was glad to talk about this album with you guys, because Kill 'Em All means a lot personally. Because even though I didn't hear it when it came in 1983, it was still part of me growing up, and Metallica was a definite part of growing up, and it happened so different than the other bands I grew up with, how I became a fan of theirs. It's just a completely different way. It wasn't because of MTV. It was just word of mouth in the neighborhood. It was underground. It was purely underground.
Yeah. And I like what you said about James. Look, James to me is, I know you say he's the rhythm guitarist because he's not doing the blistering solos like Kirk or even like Dave used to do when he was in the band, but he's lead rhythm guitar. He's like Keith Richards. Like maybe he's not doing all the fiddly bit solos, but he's setting the standard. He's creating the music, and not everyone can play like him. And I mean, unless your name's Tony Iommi, I don't know that there's ever been anyone who can come up with a riff better than James Hetfield. And like you say, keep it metronomically. I don't care if you're going 160 beats per minute. I don't care if you're going 152. Keep it there for 5, 8, 12, however many minutes that he does it. And they do have some time changes, almost like a prog band. And Maiden obviously did it too. But his steadiness doesn't get enough credit. And it's the bedrock of the sound of Metallica and thrash metal music, if you ask me.
Yes, absolutely 100% agreed. You couldn't have said it any better. It is the infrastructure of thrash metal right there.
Now, here's the other thing that we kind of lose a little bit now is that you were talking about James Hetfield being the lead rhythm guitarist. On these first three records, everybody is lead something. You forget about Cliff being the lead bassist. I mean, he's in there, he's doing his thing. Once Newsted comes along, he's basically just an employee and he gets told what to do. I don't think anybody's going to tell Cliff Burton what to do. And then you've got James. I mean, you've got Lars in the back doing drumming that you really hadn't heard a whole bunch.
That double kick, yeah.
Correct, yeah. And I know he gets a lot of crap for being, he's not that great of a drummer. He sounds pretty good on this record.
Yeah, he does. Well, and Cliff, we just had Mick Wall on the show. He comes out tomorrow, man. But Mick's like, Cliff was ready to kick you out of the band. He had somebody lined up, Lars. He was going to get somebody to replace you. Like, well, good luck replacing Lars Metallica, man. It's like replacing Eddie Van Halen and Van Halen, kind of. It doesn't work that way.
I always like to play the what if. And if Cliff wouldn't have tragically passed away, would Metallica ever have made the Black Album?
Fair question, Jay.
Would that have ever happened? Because Cliff was, as much as James was the sound of Metallica, Cliff was the soul of Metallica. And he was, you talk about the genes in the hair that they had, and they weren't the most good looking guys. Cliff is like another level.
Yeah.
And he had that attitude. And I don't know, I'm just speculating, but the way this band was, if they wanted to go in a different direction, would Cliff have left? Would Cliff have played along? What would this have been like? I don't know. Obviously no one will ever know, but I just get this feeling that they wouldn't have evolved in the way they evolved if Cliff was still in the band.
I think you're onto something there. And, Cliff gets credit now for the Kill 'Em All title, because they were going to call it Metal Up Your Ass with the, the toilet and the big, fist with the knife coming up it. And they're like, you know what? We can't put that in Walmart, and record distributors aren't going to want to do that. And apparently, legend has it that Cliff said, fucking record company people, kill them all. Like, ooh, now that would be a good title for the album. So now we've got the hammer with the blood everywhere, and that's the classic cover instead of the other one. Of course, they made a T-shirt out of the other one, and they've had subsequent releases, like videos of Metal Up Your Ass. So they still held on to it. I think they probably made the right decision, but that just adds to the lore. And you're right, no one was more metal than Cliff. And like you watch him, I think it was Behind the Music or one of those, when Scott Ian's like, when you saw Cliff headbang, and he was like, and he's a pretty big headbanger himself. He's like, would you look at that guy? Look at the way he bangs his head. And he'd be like the next day, God, I can barely move because my neck's all stiff. I was like, yeah, dude, because you're doing this for 3 straight hours, man. He was the most badass of the boys, I would say.
Yeah. So that's an interesting, thought of just what would have happened if Cliff never would have passed away. And would Metallica be the modern day Led Zeppelin that they became? With their popularity, I don't know. Would they have cut their hair for the Load albums? Would they have? Who knows? Would they have ever left Megaforce?
Right. You go to Elektra, and then Warner, and then their own. Yeah, no doubt. Well, and but at some point here, we got to talk about Mustaine. What if Mustaine had gotten his act together? Because Mustaine was very different from the guys. But Mustaine grew up very poor, father not around, on food stamps, and grew up kind of resentful of the world. Lars's father was a professional tennis player. Okay, that's a very different world, and so they would get drunk and be like, oh, isn't it fun to be out on the road with these girls, and be like, yeah, fucking hate these people, I hate the world, I hate everything that ever happened to me. Like, whoa, dude, you got to chill out, man. So it makes for great writing, and it gave him some determination, but it also led to his departure and his going to rehab 17, 18 times before he figured out, if I want to change, I'm the one who has to do it. It's not about what they did to me. It's what I want out of myself, and he deserves a lot of credit for early Metallica, but it's very different Megadeth than Metallica.
Yeah. At our age, how young we are, all three of us, we all know what it's like to be around an angry drunk.
Yep.
And
Jackson knows he lived with one for 2 years in college. No, I was a happy drunk. Anyway.
No comment.
Well, we all have experienced that. And the first time you see it, it's kind of fun. Oh, this guy's angry, he's pissed. The second time, it's a little less fun. And it gets a little less fun every time it happens. Because now when you go out, you're worried about what this guy's going to do if he has one too many. Mm-hmm. And if you can't have a good time, and you can't do all these things and whatever. So when people push back, Metallica never should have thrown Dave Mustaine out.
What choice did they
think about what it's like to be around an angry drunk every day
Yeah.
of your life, and it gets very taxing, it gets very wearing. However, that same angst that Dave has allowed him to make the music he has.
Yep.
If Dave wasn't an angry drunk, we probably wouldn't have the same Megadeth. We probably wouldn't have had the same Metallica and Kill 'Em All and whatnot. He helped Metallica formulate their sound because of a little bit of that anger. And maybe that was what set that attitude on its path, was that anger that came from Dave, that fuck you, the middle finger, all that stuff. Again, maybe, it could have been a little bit of all of them, but we know Dave's issues with alcohol and anger. I mean, you draw your own conclusion.
Yeah.
I have a bootleg of Metallica that they recorded in a garage prior to Kill 'Em All.
Ooh.
And I think it's got a version of Phantom Lord where he sings it.
Dave does?
Yeah, Dave does. I think it's Phantom Lord. I got to look at it again. But I know they do some new wave of British heavy metal. He does a Savage cover of which is a new wave of British heavy metal. He sings that song on the bootleg. And you hear that. This is before they recorded the album. I mean, you really hear that attitude and that anger come through. And they had that, but it was a little less. It wasn't as much. And I don't think it really impacted their sound completely. But, Dave is an important part of, if not the music of Metallica, if you don't want to give him credit for that, which I think he's owed a little bit, he's definitely owed a lot credit towards the attitude of that, underground, mad at the world, fuck the world attitude that Metallica had early on.
Yeah, metal up your ass sounds like something that Dave would say, at breakfast, yeah.
While he's eating his Cheerios.
That's right.
Does Dave Mustaine eat Cheerios?
I don't know.
It sounds like a little too happy for cheery.
Maybe he's more of like a Count Chocula.
You were saying about what if Dave had stayed in the band. I don't think there's any way that was going to work out. Even if he said, you know what, I'm not drinking anymore, I'm going to rehab, this is good. It was always going to be the Lars and James show. They did not have room for him, and he was not going to fall in line. Oh, okay, fellas, whatever you want to play. No, everything was going to be a fight. Everything was going to be, well, what about this? Well, I've got these songs. I mean, that's what Megadeth was. It was him. It's him being himself. And I just don't think there was a room for a third truly creative person in that band. You needed people who just said, this is what we're playing and let's go.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we all look at the former member of a band before they went on to stardom, whether it's the Beatles or whomever. I mean, and there's always a reason why. And you always look at, well, they would have been better with this guy. Maybe, but more likely not, because they were better without him. And It shows with the music that they made. There's a reason why these guys didn't last in that environment. Has nothing to do with their musicianship, or sometimes it does. But in this case, I don't think it did. I just think it manifested itself where they couldn't deal with the tension. There's nothing wrong with tension when you're creating. I think it was the tension when they weren't creating.
Yeah, work tension. Yeah.
I mean, and you're right. It's one of those deals where it's like, this guy's going to blow his top. You just don't know when. And it's funny when he's, I don't know, kicking the side of a car, and that's fun. But when it's turned back at you, then it's like, now I don't like this at all.
Yeah.
And that walking on eggshells, that gets old real quick.
Yeah, if he's going after some promoter who's ripping you off, yeah, that's great. That's where we want Angry Dave, and it's hilarious. Let him kick the shit out of him. But now he's picking on Kirk, or not Kirk, but he's picking on Lars or something like that. It's like, whoa, I'm the one who got us our contract, man. What are you doing? It's like, I don't need that in my life.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I don't think Metallica would have had the career that they've had with Dave, and I don't think they would have ever lasted with Dave. I don't think, they maybe would have lasted through Kill 'Em All, but I think it would have spun out of control shortly thereafter. And I think it serves Metallica well that even though Dave contributed with the writing of the music on Kill 'Em All, he didn't contribute to the actual playing of the music. And I think that's an important distinction, because, that was them formulating their sound as that unit, as the four, with Kirk on guitar, without Dave. And Dave went and did his Megadeth stuff, and Megadeth has had some great shining moments, but nothing close to what Metallica has. And again, when you look at Megadeth and you look at Metallica, Megadeth has had some great stuff, but there's a reason why they're not considered mainstream. And there's a reason why singing about war, death, and destruction over and over again can appeal to a little bit of an audience, but Metallica appeals to a much wider audience because of a lot of different things.
Hey, this is Tom and Zeus from Shout It Out Loudcast, and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast.
All right, well, we got to get into some of these songs here because I knew this was going to happen. We're going to start riffing and everybody's going to be like talking and having a good time. It's like, oh, geez. We talked a little bit about Hit the Lights. It's kind of their first. It wasn't a single, but it's kind of is because it was on Metal Massacre. I want to talk about the second song, The Four Horsemen, because I love this song. It is a quintessential Metallica song, but it is a Mustaine song that was originally called Mechanics. And I think it was talking about how he had sex first time, or, one of the first times at a gas station or something like that. Well, when he got kicked out, he's like, don't take any of my songs. You can't have them. And then James reworked the lyrics to talk about the Four Horsemen, built this killer bridge in the middle of it.
Time taking a toll on you, the lines that crack your face. That man's body, it has to through, withered in every place. That's the last of what you have to endure, or what you have put others through. Down, deliverance for you for sure. Now there's nothing you can do.
And I'm like, damn, that's awesome. Now, Mechanics, if you listen to it, because it was on Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, it is faster, but it's a little tinnier to me. And Four Horsemen is a little slower, so it's a little heavier, and the lyrics are way, way better. James is way ahead of Dave on that one. How do you guys feel about the difference between the two?
I got to correct myself. The bootleg I have is Dave Mustaine singing the Mechanics.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's what I couldn't remember exactly what it was. So in my opinion, The Four Horsemen is the best song on the album. In my opinion.
I'm with you.
Yeah. I think that, the differences between the both, again, there's a reason why someone left the band, and there's a reason why Metallica is who Metallica is. James is the one that put that together and made the song, or elevated the song to what we all know it became and what it is. So it's such a powerful song. It's different than Hit the Lights. Hit the Lights is a very great introduction to Metallica. But if there's a path that is set for Metallica, I think it begins with the Four Horsemen. And just the lyrics, the riff, the lead, whatever it is, it really is, again, like I said, the best song on the album.
But say you, Jackson.
I like it a lot. This goes back to the what if they could have worked with Mustaine more. I mean, you can definitely tell his influence on these songs, the ones, I mean, he's got 4 out of the 9 that he contributed on. Yeah, the Megadeth one, it's not so great, banging in the gas station. Okay, good for you. But, this whole thing of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and I don't buy that thing with Mustaine. Don't use any of my music. Sorry, dude, that's the band's music. Like, you wrote it, you got credit for it, but to say that we're not going to use it, if it's good, it's going on there.
Yeah, and I love Four Horsemen. When we did the review of when I got to see Metallica open up M72 in Amsterdam, it was the one disappointment that I have that there's no Four Horsemen. But then I went back and looked of the 5 times I would have told you that I've seen them play this live. I've seen 4 of the 10 songs live, but Four Horsemen's not one of them. And I would have guaranteed you that it was. And I think it's because it was on Live Shit Binge and Purge, in which I bought and listened to a ton. And I just kind of conflated that probably with you and me seeing them on the Black Tour in Fort Myers, Jackson. But then also I bought the deluxe edition of Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And that third disc has a killer version of the Four Horsemen on it. And I listened to that third disc more than I listened to the first two with the original stuff on it. And so I just kind of figured, oh yeah, I have heard it, but I love it. I think it is quintessential Metallica. It is kind of the birth. I mean, Hit the Lights was the first thing they did. That might have been something. They may not have even re-recorded that. That may have already been sitting around from Metal Massacre. Like, okay, we'll just plug that in. We got one, only 9 to go. But this is, to me, the best song. I mean, I know Seek and Destroy is kind of the big one, and they played the hell out of it. What about the third track, Motor Breath, which we have seen them do, I think, there, Jackson? It's kind of short and to the point, but it's about life on the road. You got the drums from Lars and descending riff from James, and then drum rolls and 6 solo from Kirk. I mean, this is a quintessential Metallica song. Although short, I mean, Metallica's kind of known for longer songs, but this Motor Breath is about life on the road and kind of a quintessential metal tune.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it shows kind of what the band or how they relate to people. It's kind of everyday things. And yeah, being on the road, it's just, especially back then, must have just been exhilarating on one point, but then horrible at the other, because the conditions were probably a little less than favorable. Not private jets to sold out concerts in Amsterdam.
Well, that's for sure. What's your take on it, Jay?
Motor Breath continues the now obvious influence of new wave of British heavy metal. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of underneath the surface throughout this whole album is I'm a huge fan of new wave of British heavy metal, and I collect new wave of British heavy metal stuff. Like some of these albums that I've been able to obtain cost some money compared to other stuff. And when you listen to all those bands, whether it's Diamond Head or Tank or Holocaust or all that stuff, and you listen to Kill 'Em All, I mean, it really is. I mean, Megaforce was right to really go after Metallica in that they needed an American band that could play this music to help further their cause. And Motor Breath, I think, exudes that more so than any other song on the album. It really hits all the points of the new wave of British heavy metal movement. And that's, why of course, it's a great song. And I think the hardcore Metallica fans that have been there since the beginning or fairly from the beginning always cite songs like Motor Breath or Metal Militia or Phantom Lord, or the songs that, if the Four Horsemen, which we just talked about, are really what they always, they got to do Metal Militia more, they got to do Motor Breath more. And I think, though, when you look at the song and you go and you listen back to some of these new wave of British heavy metal bands, it really, man, you hear it all in Motor Breath.
Living and dying, laughing and crying. Once you have seen it, you'll never be the same. Life isn't a battling, it's just how it seems.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, going to the next one, Jump in the Fire. I love this one too. Second single off the album. And I didn't realize that they had live versions of Seek and Destroy and Phantom Lord as like B-sides, although they weren't really live. They were the studio version with a little crowd noise pumped in there, So it's like we're live. And this one we've seen live, Jackson. This is killer. Another Mustaine pen song that James kind of reworked here. To me, this is killer because I think Dave did it kind of about his first sexual experience. But James kind of took it like from the devil's point of view, like, come in and join me, in what I've got going on here, kiddies. And it's going to be fun for everybody. Killer, killer, killer song.
So what was that like? Dave comes back. Hey, I got another song about screwing. All right, Dave, just relax. Take a step back here. We can work this into something else. We're not going to talk about that for every.
We're going to sing about Satan. We're not going to sing about you getting laid. All right, we're singing about the devil taking over the world and how our metal army is part of it. Right.
One thing about this that I've got written down here is that some of the solos from Kirk, they're fantastic. But some of them they kind of sound like they don't fit. They're just like, go. And he just, freaks out. Yeah, exactly. The fiddly bits. This one to me sounds like it's the best fit for the song. Like it's kind of written and put in there purposely and not just to show off.
Well, now some of these Dave made and then Kirk did it his way and then improved on it. Do you know anything about this, Jay? I mean, did Dave lay this one down, or did Kirk completely redo it, or do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't on this one. Obviously, Kirk adds his flair to it, but I don't know how much the original solo has changed. I would imagine being, Kirk being a guitar player, that when it comes to a solo or a lead, you kind of want to add what you want because that's your signature.
That's right.
And if it's not a cover song that people know, I don't know if there's a reason why. Again, speculating. So I don't know if there was ever any change. I do like you said, Mac, the change in the lyrics. Because, again, Catholic schoolboy reading lyrics about Satan welcoming you to hell is like, oh my God, I need to go to confession and talk about this song because I shouldn't be listening to it. So again, it's that darkness, and I think it served the band well. I don't know what caused all the tension between the band, but I can imagine the lyrics, how they were so willing to change this stuff when Dave left, had to be a lot of it, had to be a part of it because, they changed the lyrics for this. They changed the lyrics for, I forget what was the other one. Was it Phantom Lord? I think they did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I just think that it was better. I think James was more in tune to what they were doing with the attitude of the song. Like we always talk about how the music mirrors the lyrics, right?
Yeah.
It creates that ambiance, creates that vibe of what you want to feel with the song. And I think James understood that better than Dave. I think the band understood that better than Dave. And we see that here with Jump in the Fire.
Now, you said you didn't know what the solos were, whether they were redone or reworked or whatever. I was minding my own business. I wasn't doing anything for this show. I'm looking through Instagram, and up pops Dave Mustaine talking about how on Kill 'Em All, he wrote all the solos, and Kirk played them note for note. And that was as of maybe 2 days ago. Dude, this was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, and we're still harping on this. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that that's true, especially for somebody like Kirk. There's no way you went and just played it note for note. They said, here's kind of what we want, and then he put his own flair on it. But my point is, you're still harping on this, Dave. You can't let it go. Oh, it doesn't matter anymore. I don't care. You do care, or you wouldn't say anything.
Exactly.
In fact, I think he straight up said he hasn't listened to the 72 seasons. Really? You haven't? I bet you have. Come on.
He's missing out.
Right.
I don't know how much Dave is able to recollect what happened in 1982 and 1983, considering he's been in the rehab almost 20 times.
Right.
I do know Dave likes to say a lot of things, and Metallica never really responds. So I think Dave uses that to his advantage.
Well, it's like they're the royal family and he's Prince Harry. It's like, okay, say what you want, kid. You're not part of the family anymore.
Yeah. It's a great analogy. I don't buy it. I just don't think, maybe there's some similarities. Yeah, obviously when you have a song, you have the lyrics in your recording, you don't want to do anything too out of whack or too different. So maybe there are some similarities, but I'm willing to bet if I was going to place a smart bet on something, I'd bet that they're not exactly the same.
There's no way. And there may have been some lines like follow this, and maybe the first 4 bars of the solo, it was pretty similar. But then he kind of went and did his own thing for the next 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. But let's get to Pulling Teeth, Anesthesia, really Cliff's signature track, and it doesn't sound anything like a bass at the beginning of it, does it? I mean, it's pretty special and weird and different. And, kind of like Lemmy has his own thing. This is showing how bass could have been so different had we not lost Cliff. He was something special. And Anesthesia is the proof.
I was just going to say that about Lemmy. Cliff's playing reminded me of Lemmy in that it was unique and really didn't sound like your atypical bass.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that we have this from Cliff. I'm glad that we kind of have something to go to whenever a Metallica fan is missing Cliff. They can go listen to this. Too many times, an artist has passed and we have music because they were part of a collective, a part of a band, but we don't really have something that is really their own. And a lot of artists are like that. There are a few that we can go back and listen to, something like Eddie Van Halen did or whomever. But it's nice to have Cliff, who never saw Metallica rise to what they became, to kind of have this moment, because I think people forget what he meant to the band. And I think this really is the signature of his playing and his influence on the sound of the band.
Yeah, I agree with you there, totally. And honestly, in about the 2.5 minute mark or wherever it is that Lars comes in, Cliff continues to do some great stuff after that. I almost feel like Lars is kind of unnecessary or superfluous on it. I would almost rather I understand it's more of a jam at that point, and it can lead into like another song afterwards. I understand why it's like that, but honestly, I don't know if we need Lars on this track, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I could go either way, but usually when you can go either way, that means you don't need it.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I would agree with that statement. I just think that, this isn't something that I listen to frequently, but I listen to it every now and then. Just usually if I'm playing the album, I'll leave it on, and it just kind of reminds me of what Cliff was and the monster player that he was.
Absolutely. And then the tape, which is how most people consumed it back in the day, it comes to an end with Whiplash, the first single. I mean, if you take away Hit the Lights, which was not necessarily a single, but it's some people's first introduction to Metallica because of Metal Massacre. But this one, for some reason, I used to think this was on Master of Puppets, and I don't know why. Maybe it just fits in with some of that. But this is the epitome of thrash, and it's about headbanging, like proper headbanging. It's basically an ode to the crowd. Like, you're coming to our shows and you're doing this for 2.5 hours, and you get whiplash, and I don't know. I think it's a big thing for Burton as well, because he was the biggest headbanger of all of them. I don't know. It just shows me that they knew that they were going in the right direction here to release this first, because Four Horsemen is too long. Seek and Destroy is too long. Hit the Lights was already available. So you start with this. Like, how do we introduce the world to Metallica? It's Whiplash.
Yeah, it is. This is a song when I first heard it was like, this band sucks.
Right?
What the hell is this crap?
This isn't Photograph, man. What the hell is this?
This is nothing like that I'm into. But if you said that to one of the burnouts in the neighborhood, they'd kick your ass. Yeah, this wasn't something that I really listened to until years later, because my initial reaction was, this sucks. This is not what I'm into. My brain wasn't willing to hear something like this at this time. But it's, for a song that really was so different and is really nothing like what came before it, it really has held up well with the attitude of the song, because this whole album, the music is great, obviously, and the songs are great, but it's the attitude that really ties everything together. And when you have a song about headbanging, you got to realize that for the 5 songs that are previous to this, right?
Yep.
You've been headbanging, and now you're going to hear a song about what you've been doing for the first part of this album. So in that aspect, it's kind of really cool that a lot of bands in that new wave of British heavy metal era were singing about songs about rocking out at a concert. And a lot of these new wave of British heavy metal bands had song names after their own band name, which was kind of weird to think about. Motorhead has a song called Motorhead, and
Iron Maiden has a song called Iron Maiden, which they still do every night.
Right. And so Metallica didn't do that. but they had their new wave of British heavy metal moment where maybe Motor Breath has the sound and vibe of the new wave of British heavy metal. I can't think of a band that was heavily influenced by that period like Metallica was, to not have a song about the fans and headbanging and doing what they do at their shows. So it kind of goes into what they were influenced, and that's kind of where the song is born out of. So if people were curious as to what the inspiration was, it was the new wave of British heavy metal, and it was the shows that they were playing.
Yeah, and maybe, just like Kiss is like, well, what are you about? You're a party band. Write a song about rock and rolling all night and partying every day, right? It's like, what do you guys do? Well, we're headbanging with our people. They're up front, just dun, 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 Let's write a song about that. Why not?
I think Whiplash also, just because it's just so raw, and you were talking about Mick Wall that we got to speak to a little while ago. He basically said this is the birth of thrash metal, and to hear that, it's pretty cool. And the other thing too is that for an album that was recorded for $1.50 in 1983, this still sounds pretty good. It doesn't, like you listen to some older albums and you're like, oh, they tried, but they didn't have it yet. They've got it at this point in time. So yeah, Whiplash to me is the best one.
This is Sunny Hollywood Pooney, and you are listening to the Ugly American Werewolf in London Rock Podcast. Why? Somebody has to.
So that's side one. And now we get to some of the longer ones on side two. Starting with Phantom Lord, I got to tell you, Jackson and I talk about this all the time. There's always one song I forget, right? I mean, it's like if I haven't listened to an album in a long time, there's always one. I forget about this one. And for whatever reason, this is the one I forgot about. And I forgot how good it was. Before doing research, I said, Phantom Lord, do you like that? I'm like, I don't know. Is that on there? I can't really remember. And then I listened to it a couple times, like, this is pretty cool. It has that phaser bass to begin with, a little slow drive before it kicks in. And it's cool. Now, it's talking about, this is a Mustaine, right, that they reworked about the devil, I guess. And the Leather Army will prevail. Basically telling all you fellow metalheads that we will prevail over these suburbanites and these pretty people and the people who try to put us down. But it's also kind of telling them they're in the service of Satan. I don't know. It's very heavy, obviously, but it's an underappreciated song for me. It's better than I remember it.
Yeah. Is that a synthesizer at the beginning of the song?
Well, I don't know for sure. I felt like it was a bass that they kind of did something with, but who knows?
Yeah, no, I was always curious about that. I wasn't sure what it was, but when you hear the lyrics, at the beginning of the song, sound ripping through your ears, the opening sound of metal nears. I mean, fuck, dude.
Heavy.
I mean, these are like young kids writing that song, and you're like, dude, man, that is so badass, like so cool. So it just speaks to the genius of who they were, I think. And yeah, one of the issues it's not really an issue, but with Metallica is when I think of Kill 'Em All, I always include Blitzkrieg, Am I Evil, and Creeping Death on it, right? Because those were kind of the songs that were released. Creeping Death, I think, was on that demo prior to No Life Till Metal. And Blitzkrieg, of course, was a new wave of British heavy metal who had a song called Blitzkrieg and Diamond Head. But I always, like you, forget like the catalog because I remember hearing different songs that weren't on this album. And I always go, hey, Creeping Death, it's on Kill 'Em All. Well, actually, it's not. But, Phantom Lord, I think, again, is such a powerful tune. And I believe they did that in Hollywood, Florida. They did that live.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so badass to see that at the show. But again, another reason why Metallica is who they were with songs like that. It's very, the deep cuts, especially early on in their career, whether we talk about this, these songs on this album, Disposable Heroes on Master of Puppets and some of the other stuff on Ride the Lightning. It's just,
When I love Call of Toulouse and Orion, I mean, even the instrumentals are like, damn, this stuff is
Trapped
great.
Under Ice,
Oh, God, yeah.
Another great one. I mean, it's the depth of their catalog, the depth of their music. It's always a shame when I talk with someone about Metallica and they only know the surface songs, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when I say it's a shame that they don't appreciate or know of the stuff that made them, there are songs before Enter Sandman. There are songs before One, which are both great songs. And I know there's a big contingency of Metallica fans that doesn't want to acknowledge anything after And Justice for All. But if you're a fan of the band, you appreciate their evolution, because no band can really do anything the same unless your name is AC/DC. Right. And the thing with a song like Enter Sandman or Wherever I May Roam, they get to that point because of what they recorded earlier. They get to the point because of the songs they had previous to that. And Phantom Lord is one of those songs, and that's all part of the evolution. So if you're listening to this and you haven't heard Kill 'Em All really how you should and like you should, these are the reasons. Like this, Motor Breath, Metal Militia, Phantom Lord, these are the songs like why you should revisit this album. These are the forgotten songs that when you do go see Metallica and you've only been a fan since the Black Album and they play a song like Phantom Lord or Motor Breath, you're like, what's this song? I don't even know what this is. Go listen to it. It's a badass tune. Yeah.
Exactly. Don't go to the bathroom during stuff from Kill 'Em All, But unfortunately, I mean, they're not doing a whole lot of stuff from Kill 'Em All these days. Maybe as someone reminds them, hey, the 40th anniversary is this, maybe you could put some more into the set. But I just went to see them in Amsterdam, 2 nights, 4 hours of Metallica. We got Seek and Destroy, and that's it. That's the only thing that they played off of Kill 'Em All. So, but and you would figure when they're doing 2 nights, you would dive into a Phantom Lord once in a while. You can, you've got the time, but then, their songs are longer. You figure, well, they can play 50 songs in 4 hours. Like, well, no, it's more like 32 or so because their songs are so long. But, the leather armies have prevailed. The Phantom Lord has never failed. Smoke is lifting from the ground, the rising volume metal sound. If you're a metalhead, you read or you hear something like that, you freak out. You're like, these are my boys.
Absolutely, man. Listen to this set list that was at the show that I saw in Florida.
Yeah, give it to me.
They opened up with Creeping Death. They did Ride the Lightning, Motor Breath, No Remorse, Trapped Under Ice, The Call of Cthulhu, Phantom Lord, Am I Evil, Metal Militia, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Whiplash, Fade to Black, Seek and Destroy, Fight Fire with Fire, Blitzkrieg, and Hit the Lights.
Good Lord. That's a special night.
Yeah. So that's why I can't see him again.
I understand.
To do all those songs and do the stuff that was the deep cuts, like the stuff that they don't normally play, was really special. And I think you're right. I think, there is I think now we can say that the large base of Metallica fans are from Metallica from the Black Album and on. And then the even larger is from the Master of Puppets era and on. Mm-hmm. And I think Ride the Lightning kind of falls in between, but the Kill 'Em All is not really what people want to hear because they're unfamiliar with it. I mean, I think the only songs that they could get away with playing is probably Whiplash and Seek and Destroy at this point.
And that's mostly what they do. Now, I'll let you get out of here before too long, but I got to talk about No Remorse quickly because, this is one that I actually don't love, to be honest with you. It just, compared to everything else, there's 10 tracks on here, and I would rate this probably number 10 out of the 10 on the record. It just, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of time changes. In some areas, it just seems to plod a little bit to me. It's a little long, and it's almost like they're trying to do too much. And then for me, it's a little jarbled. Not to mention, it's right before Seek and Destroy, which is one of their all-time classics and kind of their original epic long song. So, and again, it's about war and about how, I don't care about you. I don't care about anything. I killed a bunch of people yesterday. I'm going to kill a bunch of people today. Tomorrow, I'm going to kill a bunch of more people. That's just the way the war machine works. But I'd rather hear somebody else's take on it.
Without
It's a hard song to figure out because I think out of a lot of Metallica songs, there's a lot more interpretation with this song than a lot of others. You know, I know it's about war. People have said that it's about doing what you want to do and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think anyone's right with I don't think anybody's wrong with their own interpretation of a song. But this is definitely not one of my go-to songs for Kill 'Em All. I mean, I just think that this is one of those songs, like you mentioned, that, you know, is early on in their career, their first album, and maybe the songs weren't all at the same level. And I think No Remorse is kind of the one that lags behind, in my opinion. I think they would have been better served having something like Blitzkrieg or like maybe something from No Life Till Metal on this album. But maybe it was more about, you know, not giving Dave credit or whatever the reason was with the track listing. I don't think he wrote this song or had anything to do with the writing of this song.
No, although it kind of sounds like one of his, to be honest with you, lyrically at least.
Yeah. So I would say No Remorse is one of my songs that I got up until they played it live when I saw them in November. I had not listened to this song in years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you know, you're all over social media. You see these things. Give me an album, 10 out of 10, no skips. You know, and you'll see like Heaven and Hell, Black Sabbath on there, and other stuff on there. And I'm like, is this one of them? And for me, because of that one, it's not. And I would probably put Master of Puppets on that list, and I would probably put Ride to the Lightning on that list. But I can't put Kill 'Em All on there because of No Remorse. But that's just me. That's just me.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think their two perfect albums are Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets by far and away. Kill 'Em All, I think the way I look at Kill 'Em All is the birth of greatness, right? And you know, when a human being's born, right, they can't talk, they rely on people to take care of them. And I think it's the same thing with a band. A band is learning because they just have given birth to themselves. They're learning how to walk, they're learning how to write, they're learning their strengths and weaknesses. And I think there's always going to be, very rarely does a debut album not have any missteps.
Right.
You think of Van Halen 1, the Boston debut album, you think
Appetite for Destruction. Yep.
Yeah. You don't have any missteps on those albums, right? And I think, but by and large, for the most part, there's always a song or two on a debut that probably if a band had to re-record it, they would either have baked it in the oven a little longer or maybe put something different.
Replaced it. Yeah. But then you get into Seek and Destroy, which is epic, you know, and I've seen them. I've only seen them 5 times, but they played this 3 times. You know, it's kind of one of those that they always go back to, and the crowd loves it, you know. Scanning the scene in the city tonight, looking for start up a fight. Everyone can get into that, right? People feel it in our brains. Love it, man. Epic. So much fun.
Scanning the scene in the city tonight. We're looking for you to start up a fight. There's an evil feeling in our brains, but it's nothing new. You know what drives us to say, running on our way out. You will be tired, 1,000 deaths.
It's amazing. I mean, and again, this song is the back end of their debut album that's become a mainstay in their live show. And, you know, it's part of it is the chant that the crowd goes, "Ay, ay." It's just this, it's magic when you see it live. I mean, when you really do, you can't really appreciate the song when you hear the studio version, but it is become an anthem for them. It is become, you know, it's played in stadiums. I was at a football game and there was a third down, and of course you do something to
get the defense going.
And usually everybody plays Hell's Bells, right? The thing they have a bell, you know, here the bell, the reckoning is coming. You got to stop them on third down. And I forget what game it was, and they started playing the riff of Seek and Destroy. I'm like, oh, that's cool. It's different. It's not the bells like I'm so accustomed to. So I think it's become way more than what they ever anticipated and what they ever thought would be. I think their whole career is way more than they anticipated.
I think you're right.
And I think this is the most well-known song off the album, and it probably wasn't for the first 10 years. Probably was Whiplash, and this song has become the one song that the surface Metallica fans, the casual Metallica fans want to hear.
Absolutely. Nice long song, about 7 minutes. And then we wrap up with Metal Militia. Again, a strong song. Another Dave, right? That I guess Lars and James kind of repurposed a little bit, though. And obviously, this is one of those deep cuts like you're talking about that if you're a casual fan, you don't know this one, you probably need to know this one. But it is interesting because it's kind of about not conforming, right? Not conforming to greater society. But it is about conforming to the metal team, right? It's like don't conform to those people, but conform to us. So you're still, right? You're still giving yourself up to something that maybe is bigger than you, but it's not the thing that you dislike. It's the thing that's welcoming you in, the thing that, everyone else is telling you you're a dirtbag or you're stupid or you're not cool enough to hang out with us. We're like, you are cool enough to hang out with us. Come hang out with us. But you still got to do everything the same way we do it. It's not the same way they do. Kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, that's a great analysis of it. I think the heaviness and the how fast this song is just,
it's frantic.
It is. It totally is. And it's like this grand finale of to put at the end of an album.
Oh my God.
And it just leaves you like, if you're a young kid and you're in the mid 80s and you hear something like this and you finish this album and you're done listening to Metal Militia, this leaves you wanting what's next. Like what I want more Metallica. I need more Metallica because it is so. Now we hear it now, and we hear it differently now because we know what Metallica is, and we know the music that has come after. But hearing this in the mid '80s, you've got to go there with your mind and just remember what music was like at this time. And hearing this song, it was so different. I mean, the whole album is heavy, but this is like on a whole nother level. And you're confused, you're excited, you're wanting more, you're afraid to have your parents hear this song. You're all these things. You're like this kid in your room going, what? I can't let anybody know that I heard this, because that's the thing too. Back then, when you listen to stuff, because there was so much controversy about Ozzy, Maiden, Priest, Metallica, all these bands,
Wasp.
You felt a sense of evil when you heard this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was all made up. It's all make believe. It's all
fantasy.
Put there by people that want you to think that you shouldn't listen. They make you afraid of what you're doing. But back in the day, when you're an impressionable kid, and you're raised in an Italian Irish Catholic home like I was, and you go to Catholic school like I did, and you're taught by penguins like I was, and you were an altar boy and all this stuff. Listening to this stuff was like you were afraid if your parents found out.
Sure.
And Metal Militia, when you hear it, you're like, oh my God, this is the work of the devil. I'm going to go to hell. I need to pray and all this stuff. And I think that's what the Burnouts figured out was, no, you're not going to go to hell.
Yeah.
And maybe you will, but this is a song that speaks to my anger and angst and my confusion as a teen inside of me. And that's what Metallica, by accident, was able to capture the band, the kid that's been disenfranchised or outcasted.
Exactly.
They spoke to them, and this was the beginning.
Yeah, it's you're talking directly to the metalhead here. It's like, join us. They're disenfranchising you. They're weakening you. They're separating you out and saying, no, you're no good. We're saying together, we're strong, and we march together. We're badass. That's what we're here for, And even, when I saw them in the huge stadium tour a couple of months ago, it was like, we are Metallica. It's not just us up here on the stage. The fans who need this release, who need this music to get through their lives, we're all in this together. Now, I wasn't on the private plane with them, but I did feel a sense of community there with 50, 60,000 other people.
Yes. Now, Mac, think of this, right? Because you've been to a lot of concerts. I've been to a lot of shows. When you don't go see Metallica, there's always at least one person at that event wearing a Metallica shirt. Okay? Always one. There's always one guy walking around with a Metallica shirt at a Maiden show, at a freaking Crosby, Stills and Nash show, whatever it is, right?
Right.
When you go to a Metallica show, no one has another band shirt on. It's all Metallica. And those T-shirts, the uniqueness of those shirts, because there's so many and they have limited runs on T-shirts, everybody wears their T-shirts like it's a uniform of a metal military.
That's right.
Okay. And when the kids, the burnouts at the young age, they figured it out, right? They wore their back patch and the Metallica shirts. They were the beginning of the Metallica army. And it's grown and grown. I mean, you go to a Metallica show and you see hundreds of different T-shirts walking around, right? And Metallica fans pick their T-shirt by a lot of different things. When they came into being a fan, what's the fan of their favorite period, or how the T-shirt speaks to their psyche and to their thoughts, right? And it's just remarkable because we're on Metal Militia. Militia, is essentially an army. How they've been able to foster that and grow that. Because when you go to a Metallica show, whether it's the 7,000 seater that I saw, whether it's the 60,000 seater that you saw, or whether it was back in the day when I was freaking 11 years old, going to see him at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, sneaking in. And
did you see him at Aragon?
Yeah, I saw him at Aragon.
No way.
And I'm just telling you, man, from that moment on, when you go see Metallica and you're a Metallica fan, you're all in. You are all in. That's why, like, when, Metallica is one of my favorites, not my favorite, but dude, the hardcore live and breathe Metallica fan, there's nothing else like it in rock and roll other than maybe Rush or Pink Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
I would put those three probably, in equal pairing.
Well, and there is a family kind of thing about it. Like, you're here with your people. And when I did that thing in Amsterdam, where it was like the Thursday night was the first show, Saturday night was the second. When I come back Saturday night, it's all the same people. We all have the same seats the next night. And we're all welcoming each other and hugging each other and buying each other beers the second night because, we went through it and got to know each other a little bit night one. And now it's like, hey, we're all back. We're all together. And, hey, they're going to play this. They're going to play one. They're going to play, whatever. And just having fun like that. It's like, yeah, you're with your people here, And I was with a girl not that long ago who was like, oh, you go to the Metallica show? Oh, I think I'd be scared to go to that. I'm like, whatever, man. You went to that Dead and Company show with me 5 years ago, and I was scared to death. These people are on all sorts of weird drugs, and I don't know what they're going to do, and they're walking around saying and acting ridiculous and odd. I'm like, I've never been, and I'm kind of a big guy, I know, and she's a little girl, and that there's a difference there. I understand, but I've never really been scared at a Metallica concert before. Not like I was at that Dead and Company show. I'm like, what is wrong with these fucking people?
I was scared at that Aragon show when I was 11.
Well, you should have been. You were fucking 11.
Mostly because, I thought everybody looked like a mass murderer back then. But a great story of my childhood. I grew up in Des Plaines, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. And Des Plaines, Illinois is widely known as being where John Wayne Gacy got a majority of his victims.
Okay.
And a lot of his victims, I was in high school at the time, but a lot of his victims, I think 14 of them, went to the high school that I eventually went to.
Holy shit.
So you grow up, Irish Catholic family, and also this presence of a serial killer in the early part of your life. You have issues already. And I remember sleeping over at a friend's house, and Metallica was in town. I think they were playing at what is now the Allstate Arena, but again, I think it was Master of the Puppets tour. I think they were opening for Ozzy, I want to say.
Sounds
and
right.
It was back then it was called the Rosemont Horizon.
Okay.
And my friend's older brother got a call from a friend that after the show they were hanging out. Metallica was hanging out at this place called Forest View Bowl. It was a bowling alley, which was right down the road from Rosemont Horizon. So he left and we were there and we're like, Metallica's at Forest View Bowl? So we rode our bikes at like midnight.
Nice.
Forest View Bowl. And there's a crowd in the parking lot. Everyone, the Metallica music's playing. There's cigarette smoke. There's marijuana smoke. And we got in and because we were smaller, we were able to wiggle through people. And there they were at this table, smoking cigarettes, signing autographs, talking with whomever. And we were there for probably, because we wanted to get back. We were there for like probably 15 minutes, no longer than 15 minutes. And I just remember seeing them, at 12 years old. And it wasn't like I was right next to them, but I could see them.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we walked out and we rode our bikes home in silence, just like what we saw. Like we just saw Metallica like 10 feet from us, like signing autographs, smoking Marlboro Reds or whatever they were smoking. And
Right.
the crowd in the parking lot was like, it was like a pregame of a show, and I didn't know really what that meant at the time. But it was just, there was always like this connection. And the radio station I mentioned earlier, WVX, had a big connection with Metallica. Like every time they came in town, they were always in studio with them. They would always talk to them on the phone in other parts of the country.
Cool.
So Metallica had this huge presence in this radio station, and this DJ, Scott Loftus, who I don't know whatever happened to him. But I just remember the moment and just seeing them grow in their career and seeing who they were and who they had become. I always go back to that moment in the Aragon Ballroom moment as being present when they were underground. And it kind of, as I get older, I appreciate it more. And as I get older, the small fish that you caught that size now is, this size. So maybe there's a little bit of embellishment there, but it's just cool to have that. And I've shared that with my son and his friends, and, they look at me like, oh my God, but they can't grasp how I got on a bike at midnight and rode my bike over busy streets at midnight.
It's something we did back in the day. Yeah.
Back in the day, we did it. And I don't think his parents ever knew that we were there. And
probably not.
Yeah, just a great moment. So Metallica has always meant something to me. I just remember the curiosity of the kids with the Metallica shirts and why they were so passionate. Why I couldn't get as passionate about Motley Crue as they got passionate about Metallica.
Right.
And now I know why.
Yeah.
And
they gave you 51 minutes, right? They give you 51 minutes, which was unheard of back then. The year before, Van Halen gave you 31 minutes to Dive Her Down, and half of its covers anyway, right? So suddenly someone comes in, and Van Halen's badass, right? Van Halen's not cheating you. We haven't gotten to 1984 yet at this point. But yeah, Van Halen, the best band in the world, just gave you 31 minutes the year before. And now these guys come in heavy as hell, fast as hell, with damn near an hour of this stuff. It's like, this is the changing of the guard. This is the way the world is turning.
And it all started in 1983, my man. It really did, with Kill 'Em All. And, to touch on it really quick, the new wave of British heavy metal movement is so important to Metallica. And Lars has spoken openly about it. Not so much James and Kirk, but Lars he grew up in Denmark, so he got a front row seat to it. But when you hear these bands and you look at the old bills that Metallica was on, whether it was with Diamond Head, Tank, Raven, Holocaust,
Venom,
Savage, all these bands. I know I'm forgetting
Angel Witch.
No, Angel Witch. Yeah, Angel Witch. Great album. That debut album is fantastic. And you listen to this stuff, Witchfind, another great guy. I can go on and on.
Tigers of Pantang.
Oh, Tigers of Pantang, man. Seriously, just absolutely incredible. John Sykes,
absolutely
player of Tigers of Pantang before he was in Thin Lizzy. But when you listen to that stuff, and I always like to peel back the orange, right? I wouldn't listen to new wave of British heavy metal unless it was for Metallica. If you're a Metallica fan, diehard cutthroat Metallica fan, and you haven't really dove into the new wave of British heavy metal, do it. You'll love it. Iron Maiden, their first two albums are considered, one of the best new wave of British heavy metal albums. Saxon was a big new wave of British heavy metal.
Huge.
It's so primitive. It really is. When you hear this music, it's not flashy. The musicianship isn't the greatest. The production isn't the greatest. And a lot of it. And a lot of the albums, the production just isn't there. But what it is, and why you should appreciate it is a direct and the first correlation in group of influence bands that came from Black Sabbath. That's it, Black Sabbath. I mean, when you hear all this music and you see how it is, there's some Zeppelin, some Purple in there, but everybody talks about Black Sabbath being the grandfathers of heavy metal. And then there's Metallica, Maiden, Priest, Metallica, Motorhead. But this is the era that no one talks about a lot. Some people do, but this is the era that if you like Sabbath and you're Metallica, Maiden, Motorhead, Priest, this is an era for you. You got to go check it out. I mean, I love Tank. I love Diamond Head. I love all these bands. And it is, you can go down a rabbit hole of new wave of British heavy metal, and you will come out like you'll be spending money hand over fist on Discogs buying this stuff.
Right. No, I've done some of that myself. But when you say, well, yeah, it's not always the greatest musicianship. It doesn't always have the greatest quality. But compared to punk, which is what it was kind of versus, it's much better musicianship, and it has much clearer things to say. And they're way better at everything than the punks. The punks were kind of like, no, we can't play. We're just pissed off. And that's cute for a year or two. And it's like, okay, can we evolve past this? But I mean, talk about bands that evolve. Look at this first record by Metallica, and then look what they did for the next 10 years. They kept evolving and evolving. And then after that, even changing up what they're doing, pushing it as artists. They're not one-trick ponies, obviously. And this was the start of it all.
I mean, it's similar to Led Zeppelin. Think of Led Zeppelin 1 all the way through the Outdoor. You know,
yeah, Zeppelin 1 is a blues album. Into the Outdoor is a prog album.
Pretty much. And so was Presence, you know?
Yeah.
And I love it when bands do that. I want to see evolution. You know, like I said, AC/DC is great. One of my favorite bands too as well. They're the only ones that could really do it. But for the Metallica fans that shun everything after And Justice for All, well, that's on you.
Yeah.
That's because you can't get over the fact that Metallica needed to change. Metallica couldn't release the same album as they were doing with And Justice for All, with Master of Puppets, with Ride the Lightning. They're all great albums, but like any artist, you need to keep things flowing. You need to keep things different, and that's what they did. And that's why they're Metallica. That's why they're great. That's why they're the biggest band probably since Zeppelin, since Van Halen, since AC/DC. You know,
yeah.
I think of that interview that Jason Newsted did when they played in Russia with AC/DC. Can you imagine being at that show? Can you imagine? And how there was a minor tremor earthquake started because of the people jumping up and down in Russia because of AC/DC Metallica.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. So, yeah, Kill 'Em All, it all begins with that. But if you really want to peel back the orange and find out where they came from and where their heads were at that moment, new wave of British heavy metal, go down a rabbit hole, and you will know. And you will appreciate Metallica even more after you hear that stuff.
Well, that's great stuff, Jay. Thanks so much for coming on and chatting on this. I didn't obviously I knew you knew Metallica well, and that's why I wanted you to come on and do it with us. But I didn't know, obviously, that you'd seen them at the Aragon of all places. That's amazing. And, you were just a kid, and those are some great stories. Why don't you tell our listeners where people can find you?
Well, I'm Jay Scott. I'm the host of the Hook Rocks podcast, the ultimate rock community podcast. You can find us wherever you podcast, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, iHeart, Google, Amazon, wherever. I don't know when this is going to air, but we're approaching our 400th episode. We're approaching, our 4-year anniversary and our 500th episode. And we really talk about 3 different things, or 3 different chapters, I want to call them. We do the legacy artists, interview, bands from our past. We just had on George Lynch a little bit ago. We've had Rick Nielsen on, Scott Gorham, and Thin Lizzy. We also do a lot of new music spotlights of the new rock and roll that's out there, the new rock music, which I think is just as good as any period of rock music. And I think people just got to give it a chance. And then we also have music commentary where we talk about different things, whether it's a live album review or legacy of a band that we grew up and loved. And then we also talk about what's going on the business side with TikTok and with AI, artificial intelligence, and streaming, and the business side, and all the stuff that's happening. And we also tackle a lot of stuff about audio. We do a quarterly audio episode with my friend Rob. Talks about how to position speakers in your house. And
those are some great episodes, man. I love those.
Yeah. So we have got a little bit of something for everyone. So hopefully, anyone who's listening, give us a chance. Go ahead and tune in. Mac has been on our show too as well, and loved having him on. I saw him also at Rockin' Pod. We had a quick chat at Rockin' Pod, which was a lot of fun, and glad to do this with you finally, and glad to be on your podcast too as well.
Well, thanks, Jay. You keep up the great work.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac.
Well, thank you, bud. Keep up the great work.
I will do that, man. Take care.
Well, that wraps up our time with Jay from the Hook Rocks, talking about Metallica's Kill 'Em All, turning 40 on July 25th, 2023. If you can believe it. We really appreciate Jay coming on. He's got a great show, The Hook Roxy. Like you mentioned, he just had his 500th episode and his 4th year. Great work, Jay. Thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for all the great work that you do and helping to keep rock and roll alive. Metallica is really a story of just sticking to your guns, man. Just hanging in there, doing what you believe in, and the world will come to you. Like I said, 1983, what were we listening to in 1983? Men at Work, Duran Duran, Michael Jackson, Lionel Richie, maybe Def Leppard, maybe Quiet Riot, but definitely not Metallica. And it didn't sell off the charts. I mean, what did it sell, like 60,000 copies within its first year, something like that? But now it's multi-platinum, just like all Metallica albums are. And it's the foundation, right? It's the first record from what is now the biggest band on the planet in the middle of an 18-month, 72 seasons tour around the world, doing 2 shows, no repeats, in stadiums. Not in arenas, not in clubs, in stadiums. And while this may not have been on my radar in 1983, you can't deny its classic status at this point. And I know all metalheads out there are going to celebrate one way or another. So we want to know out there, metalheads, do we get something right? Do we get something wrong? Do we miss the point? Do we leave out your favorite part? You got to let us know. Email us. It's uglyamericanwerewolf@gmail.com. You can also DM us on Twitter, which is ugly_werewolf. Or ActionJack72. We're on Instagram. We're on the new Threads. We're on YouTube. I think we're on Facebook. You reach out to us. You let us know the bands, the albums, the DVDs, the concerts, the books, the rock properties you want us to talk about. Thanks as always to Pantheon Podcasts, of which Jay the Hook Rocks is a proud member, as are we. And thanks, of course, to our sponsor, RareVinyl.com. I don't care where you are in the world, guys. RareVinyl.com will give you 10% off your orders if you put in the code UGLY when you make your order. They've got some great rare Metallica stuff, some found in Europe only Metallica stuff. So go to RareVinyl.com, use the code UGLY, and save yourself 10%. Now, hopefully we're going to have some fun Metallica news to announce in the coming week. Can't tell you any more than that, but there's some stuff brewing that we're all pretty excited about. And I hope to be able to share it with you on the next episode. As far as the next episode goes, it is going to be a doozy. I finally got to take Jackson to his first ever Iron Maiden concert. We flew to Europe, to Amsterdam, and then took the train to Antwerp for his second Iron Maiden concert. And some amazing things happened during and after the show in the hotel bar that you're going to want to hear about. And we're going to have a special guest on the show, a special podcast guest who is all about Iron Maiden. So until next time, to all you rockers all around the world, be cool and stay safe.